Welcome back. I was at this year's Congressional Black Caucus annual legislative conference in Washington, D.C., moderating the 2012 Town Hall. The conversation included people from different political parties, generations, and perspectives, all committed to protecting our interests, our vote, and our country.
Ever voted before.
Let me start with you, Ms. Brazile. As Vice Chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, you've been around this country. What do you see going on?
Over the last 12 months, we have seen more than 180 restrictive voter ID laws introduced in state legislative halls all throughout the country. Just to let you know the impact that these laws will have, 17 states have passed restrictive voting laws, 17 states that have the potential to impact the 2012 presidential election. These states account for 80% of the electoral votes that are needed in order to win the presidency. I want to urge everyone to show up with pretty much everything that you can produce: your driver's license, your birth certificate, your voter registration card, anything, and utility, and your utility payments, because this fall, we will see hurdles that we have not seen since 1965. And this is something that should bother all of us.
We understand that the laws are changing, but the question here also is, does it constitute racial discrimination?
Well, first of all, it's discrimination because any number of studies, but I'll quote the Pew Group, have talked about the disproportionate impact it has on African Americans and Latinos. One, we are not against identification. You know, they're trying to act like you have to have ID to do anything. We're saying have the same ID this year that you had when Reagan ran and Clinton ran and Bush ran. People need to be clear. We're not talking about we're against ID. We're against the new restrictive voter ID because they're trying to sell the public we just want to open up the polls. That's not what we're doing. We're saying that there's been no fraud. The Justice Department has established there's been 0.0003% cases of fraud. So this is a solution looking for a problem, not a problem looking for a solution. Lastly, I'm glad you put me on this side because I am with the conservatives. I'm a conservative. I'm trying to conserve the Voting Rights Act. I'm trying to conserve the Civil Rights Act. The radicals are those that are trying to have a radical departure from what made this country great. We're trying to conserve the country. Others are trying to turn the country back, and we're not going back.
Not going back.
Earlier this year, there were 10 felons, convicted felons, who were found to have voted illegally. And also in April of this year, in a statewide report, they found 50 people in Virginia who voted illegally. And so the Richmond Times-Dispatch said that this was not a problem in search of a solution or a solution in search of a problem, but this was very real. And so from my perspective, is this racialization? We are all equal in this country under the color of law. These voter ID laws are designed specifically to allow people to have the confidence in the integrity in the ballot box that has been upheld by our Supreme Court and our rule of law.
And folks, here are the facts. Voter ID laws are not Jim Crow because they apply to all of us no matter what our skin color. 89% of Americans in this country have the proper ID to vote. Whose fault is it that 25% of Black Americans will not or cannot get an ID? Whose fault is that? When others seem to get IDs. And did you know in 2008, when the Supreme Court ruled on Indiana's voter ID law, they found it to be constitutional. And guess what? After the laws were passed in Indiana and Georgia, minority participation in the electoral process increased for Blacks by 40%. So I find it very hard to believe, and I'm tired of being talked down to as a Black woman and being told what I can't do. To me, our message needs to be, what's wrong with the 11%? They need to get with the game and get an ID to vote, because voter fraud does occur.
I was supposed to be going to a Google Hangout, but I have three members of Congress and the civil rights leader about to jump out their chairs.
Listen,
so,
and I'm going to be very, very brief. No one here is saying we can't. All of us have overcome something in our lives. That's not the issue. But we fought a battle for equality and justice a long time ago. If we don't stand up for it now, our children and grandchildren will be fighting it 40 years from now.
One second, Crystal. I'll give you a chance to get back in, but we're going to do this dignified.
You raise whose fault it is that people don't have IDs. My grandmother's birth certificate is my Bible. She didn't have a birth certificate. It's in the Bible. These young people that live in cities like New York, Philadelphia, they don't even drive. So why do they need a driver's license? They take public transportation. A lot of them don't have jobs because of the way this economy is going. Disabled people don't drive. Why do they need an ID? We have to look at who has been singled out in this process. It is students, it is poor people, it is the elderly, it is the disabled, it is people who historically vote Democratic.
Okay.
It is predetermined.
I'm going to have to pause. I'm going to let Reverend Sharpton respond.
First of all, we can have different opinions, but we can't have different facts. The fact...
And where were my facts different? Where were my facts wrong?
I didn't interrupt you one time.
But you implied.
I didn't interrupt you one time.
Implied my facts were different.
Quoted us and we didn't.
We're going to let everyone respond. We're going to let everyone engage.
I don't think we should misrepresent the truth.
The Indiana case that the Supreme Court ruled was not the same ID laws that we're dealing with in Pennsylvania and in other states. You're acting as though that one case is a uniform ID law. As Congresswoman Fudge said, we have state by state different laws. Texas has one law, Pennsylvania another law, Ohio another law. If in fact, as Ron Christie said, they had the national federal ID law, you could say that. We're talking about different states, different laws, and we should not act as though the Supreme Court ruling said that. As a case in point, a fact is a Texas federal court just said it is discriminatory, the ID laws that they put in Texas in 2012. That's one. That's one. That's a fact. That's a fact. Secondly, when you change these state laws, mostly early this year and late last year, the game was already on for this election. We are not talking about changing something later. We're talking about changing something now. People cannot vote now that could have voted in the last election, and many did. That is changing the game mid-game. Don't tell me why wasn't I prepared. Why did you change the game?
Coming up.
And that's why this election is important. Whatever it takes, we got to get out there and vote like we never, ever voted before. We got to do it.
Our World with Black Enterprise is sponsored in part by State Farm. Find an agent or get a quote at statefarm.com.